Hello. Welcome to SINFO 32. We are officially underway. This time we will have a keynote with Pinto, Principal Solutions Architect at Amazon. Give it up for him.
Thank you. I see full house. It's a pleasure to be opening Cisco. It's a little bit of a problem. I'm not an international speaker. I know there was a lot of talk before. I'm actually Portuguese. I studied at Técnico roughly 7 years ago, but I don't live in Portugal, so I kind of count somewhere in the middle. This session is going to be roughly about 30 minutes, and I'm going to talk about how can you grow your career up to get an associate level job at a FANG company, Amazon, for example, all the way to a principal engineer, which I am. I'm a big fan of art, so I'd like to start with a painting. If you look at this painting on the left, this is one of the first paintings from Picasso. He did it when he was like 9 years old, roughly. It's a nice painting. But if you look at this one on your right, is one of his later paintings in the same style. And what I want you to take away from this is that everybody, most people that you know and that you see, even on TV, founders, all of that, those folks, worked hard and worked on their craft. It's not like they were born, knowing all of this. And that's what I want you guys to also take. Probably most of you are still students, right? So even if, compilers is not going that well for the ones that study in Technic, it's okay, it will get better. So who am I? I put this slide because I want to convince you to stay the whole 45 minutes. It's not to boast, it's just really for you to know that I know what I'm talking about. I'm currently principal engineer at AWS. I was the youngest principal engineer of AWS ever. I was also the youngest staff engineer at Cisco. Last year, actually, the year before the last one, because we already are in 2025, I was one of the most read authors of AWS. I have some books, but it was mostly regarding white papers and integration papers and blogs. My books. And one of the most important things you should take away from this session is this is not only me speaking, right? This is going to be a little bit biased towards my experience, but I know principal engineers in many companies, Microsoft, Google, you name it, Meta. And I was very obsessed in becoming a principal engineer before I turned 30. So I did kind of a scientific approach to this. I distill a lot of knowledge, what works, what doesn't. And this presentation is going to be a little bit telling you how do I see it. The agenda is very simple. I'm going to start by explaining you the typical roles. This doesn't apply to every company, but most big companies function in the same way. Then I'm going to speak about what engineering skills you need to work in engineering. Again, they're very standard. And then I'm going to map those, right? Per each role, per each, let's say, seniority of each role, what do I see work best? What would I recommend you focus on? And what I see as like, that doesn't work so well. At the end, I'm going to show you my career progress and what actually worked for me with specific examples. At the end of it, we have like roughly 15 minutes or so for questions. So if you have any specific question, by the end, we'll talk about it. Starting off, the role landscape, okay? Most IT companies function roughly in the same way. They're distributed from associate all the way to distinguished engineer, and they kind of map these roles to years of experience, okay? Don't focus specifically on the numbers, but this is roughly what most companies work towards. Nowadays, we see some intermediate steps. For example, they use senior principal engineer, senior staff engineer, but still, you kind of can distill it to years of experience and scope. And scope is the one you have on the bottom. So when you join a company, usually they're going to have you focus on specific tasks, right? They're going to give you a task and you must do that. As you progress to your career, it's going to become more ambiguous and bigger scope. Usually when you are like a mid-level engineer, you're going to work on small projects. Then you're going to, when you're a senior level engineer, let's say bigger projects, bigger products as well. By the time you reach staff, you're usually responsible either for a part of a product or whole product, depending on the company. At Amazon, when you are a principal engineer, you already have a part of a product. Not the whole product. Usually there's more than one principal engineer per product, right? Because it's a very, very big company. But this is kind of what I want you to think about when you're thinking about your career, right? This is the steps. I like to divide it in 3 because the skills needed for some of these steps are very different, and you'll see them as I go through the presentation. So for associate, this is where I'm going to start. I think from your faces, that's where many of you are still focusing on, right? Leaving the university and getting a role. Then progressing all the way to senior engineer. And then when you get to staff, principal, all of those, there's some nuances there. So what type of skills do you really need? Usually when you talk with people, you can see this online as well, people separate skills into 2 types. Hard skills, this is going to be programming languages, databases, Python, everything, real compilers. just technical skills, really. And then they put the second bucket, which is everything else. They call it usually soft skills, right? Presenting, writing, working with others, even problem solving falls within soft skills oftentimes. However, when I speak about roles and when I speak about career progression, these buckets are not enough, I think, and I like to have a 2.0 version of this, okay? So technical skills are still the same, and those are going to be present in engineering always, right? There's no escaping that. But I like to separate soft skills into two buckets. First of all is execution skills. And this is very important, especially in your career. This is where I put in here is problem solving, time management, meaning you say you're going to do it in a week, sprint, whatever it is. Did you actually do it? Can you actually do it, right? Those are execution. Also working with others as you progress through your career. You're going to stop working alone. You're going to have to work with more people. I know it's a bummer, but it's true. And then the later bucket is communication skills. And this becomes increasingly important throughout your career, as you're going to see. But in this bucket, I put presenting. But presenting doesn't need to be like today, right, in an event. Could be presenting to your team or to sister teams, right? Also, translating, and translation here is not Spanish to Portuguese or English, something like that. It's more translating requirements, connecting business to product, to engineering. Those are very important, again, as you progress. And lastly, documentation. Writing is becoming, now with ChatGPT, LLMs, all of this, writing is becoming more and more ubiquitous, so everybody needs to write, and writing well versus just writing is a big difference. I've seen principal engineers becoming a principal engineer just because of their writing skills. They are very clear, it's very concise, it's very good to read what they write, so it's a skill. It doesn't look like an engineering skill, but trust me, it's an engineering skill. Now that we level set between skills and scope of role, right, the several levels, I'm going to go into it individually, and I'm going to tell you what do I see as the ideal profile. Starting by associate, right? Let's say you are finishing university, you want to get into an associate role. Like I mentioned, associate roles usually are focused at the task level, right? When you're interviewing for one of these companies, they're going to try to understand if you can do the tasks they have for you, right, at a small level. I like to put execution here as the bigger part of the ball, as you see there, because especially big companies, they can still teach you, right? So when I joined my first company, I joined Cisco, I didn't know that much about networking, just the fundamentals really, and they taught me all Cisco CLI, all of those stuff. Equally, if you know Python, Amazon can teach you Rust. That's realistic. So what they're looking for in people is people that can execute on tasks well, right? And they can learn. This is very important, learn. So what should you focus on? At this point, you're just, like a plant growing really, so you should focus on knowing the fundamentals. More important than knowing Python, C, Java, is knowing data structures and algorithms. Those are going to apply throughout, right? So they're going to apply to any language. Second, and I think this was touched before, not only extracurriculars, they can be seen as extracurriculars, I guess, but building a portfolio. More important than just studying a bunch of theory, reading a bunch of books, is actually putting those into practice. You get a lot of hands-on skills from there. And programming is the same. Like if you stop programming for a while, you'll notice that you'll become slower at programming, of course. It's pretty much like playing League of Legends or Counter-Strike, for those that are there. If you stop playing Counter-Strike for a while, you're going to miss your shots, right? Then a third thing that I see, you are all here, so you're doing that well, is to start your network, right? Early in your career, networking might seem less important, maybe, but don't neglect the power of having, for example, a friend at that company or at a different company, or just being able to speak with someone else about interviewing, right? Interviewing experience. What type of algorithms are they saying in the questions? So this is very important even at an associate level. And the last one is very controversial, but if you want to join what they call FANG or manga companies nowadays, right? These top ones like Netflix, all of that, their interview questions are still very biased towards this type of algorithmic questions, right? People argue, but I will never invert a binary tree while I'm working somewhere else. Yes, true, but they're still going to interview you on it. So if you cannot invert the binary tree, you're probably not going to get the job. So if you are trying to get into one of these top companies in the sense of being famous, practicing lead code is still a very, very important thing. What are the common things I see missing? Too many technologies. Sometimes I open CVs, and for the record, I interview roughly probably 50 people a year, give or take, for Amazon. People put that they know like 10, 12 programming languages. Some of them I don't even heard of them. So it's very confusing that someone out of college is proficient in 10, 12 programming languages. I think is not good enough. I think we should rather focus on the fundamentals, and that's actually the second point, right? I think it's much more important that you go to an interview, you know a lot about system design, you know a lot about data structure and algorithms, and you'll be able to answer those questions, and you'll be able to clear it in any language that you are comfortable with, because after we can teach you whatever we need you to learn. If you follow this, you're going to reach this point, which is you got your job. Now you're working at Fang, or Manga, whatever they keep changing the name. You're working at one of these nice companies, but you want to continue going on, right? Something I see from the profile of the folks that enter these companies that are very ambitious. This is actually a fact. Most of our associates want to grow very fast. They always want to focus on promotion. They want to do more, learn more. And if you follow the normal path, it's going to take you at least 4 years. But there's ways to make it quicker. How can you make it quicker? This is really a grind, right? So you should focus on knowing things. By the time you enter one of these companies, you should be learning a lot about their specific tech stack, programming languages, right? So you're going to be seeing a shift from execution to also technology, right? At this point, you are responsible for your own learning. They're going to help you, of course, but you want to become the go-to person, right? Likewise, you want to be building things. Not only what you required, right? Your projects, those you need to build, there's no way around it, but also more. Like if you see things that shouldn't be there, maybe some tech debt, maybe something else, you should be addressing that, right? The more you do, just like with the hands-on, like I said before, Counter-Strike, the more you play, the better you are, right? So here is not going to be any different. These people at Fang, I see them doing a lot more than what is expected, and that's even how the promotion process works, right? When you are looking at the next level, they will be looking if you are already doing things at the next level rather than the level you are at. And the third point is just that, is being reliable, right? So don't overpromise. You need to be the person that people look forward to ask something, right? If they need help, be the person, no, I'm going to ask Ivo about this, right? There's a very good book that I would recommend you guys to read if you have time, which is So Good They Cannot Ignore You. That book talks a lot about that, about you are so good at your craft, right? Ronaldo plays everyday football until at one point you're so good, people go to you. If they have a Python question, we'll ask him because he probably knows, or a question about the specific part of the product. And the last part on this very long grind, which is from associate to senior, is that you should be doing what others don't. So let's say that piece, that documentation, which is a big one, nobody wants to do documentation. But not only that, right? Like maybe some addressing tech debt rather than working on the latest cool things. I often see the people that do best are the people that work on things that others don't want to work on. Obviously, you don't need to make your career out of it, but it does help to build a reputation, right? That you're a reliable individual, you'll do whatever it takes. Doesn't matter if the project is like the new LLM, very flashy, or just something, some networking stuff. What are the common pitfalls I see? For sure, lack of consistency. Obviously, we all know motivation comes in waves. Maybe you're very motivated, then you work a little, then down, up, and so on. I see that is not very good because it doesn't give you like this consistency that I just mentioned. Usually, the people that do well are very consistent. They don't do a lot, and then they do a little, then do a lot, do a little. They just do, okay? And that's something important. And the last one is overextension, meaning you commit to a lot, but then you don't deliver it. Maybe this happens once, it's okay. It can happen, it happens to everybody. But some people consistently say, no, this sprint is for 2 weeks, no problem, I'll just do it tonight or in 2 days, right? They have this, I don't know, maybe ego, but just overextension, right? You are promising more than you can actually do, and that ends up building a reputation that you do not want. By here, this is already a lot of years, right? So this seems to be speed running it. This is kind of speed running Fang. But most people up to this point, as I can show you the slide before, it's already 4 or 5 years of experience, maybe more, depending, right? So it's a lot of time. It looks like it's not, but it's a lot of time. And then let's say you have reached there and you want to be a principal engineer. And this is where things start to change dramatically, I would say. From senior and above, there's staff, there's all these funny levels. The scope becomes, they could say at program level, sometimes they also say strategic, and if you go further, like distinguished, they say vision level. What that means is that oftentimes people mistake this from stop being technical to being, more product management and this sort of thing. But that's not the role of a principal engineer. If you look at my ball here, I do separate it between execution and communication. Yes, those are 40% each, and only 20% technical. However, you are still a technical role, right? Like as they were saying in the presentation before this one, you are a IC or individual contributor, as they say, right? Usually you don't have reports, at least not direct reports. They might be indirect reports. But your focus, right, should still be setting the technical vision, working on technical things. You are not a manager. There's also another book I mentioned here because this is really a mindset shift, which is What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And that book really talks about this, right? What got you to being a senior engineer, like knowing technical things, building technical projects, doing what others want, building really cool technology, really, will not necessarily bring you to the staff and to the principal level. Many people actually stop at the senior level because of that, right? It's really a mindset change. So how can you make it, and what should you focus on if you are in that position? The first thing is staying up to date. The biggest mistake I see by far is that these principal engineers usually just stop somewhere along the line. So they're like a cut-off date. They stop studying, they stop knowing new things, and that's not good because people, again, you are working on the latest things, especially if you're working in tech, so you should continue to be up to date with technology, and that's something I see people not do. The second one, and that is actually very hard for me, so I'm still getting better at that, is that you should lead and coordinate rather than do everything yourself. When you come from an IC background like myself, when I was a senior engineer, I was good at doing code, so I just prefer to do it myself, right? I just do it, I'm quick, let's do it. However, when you want to become staff, when you want to become a principal engineer, you cannot do everything, right? Products become very big, there's a lot of features, there's a lot of delivery. Yes, realistically you could do a lot. Even if you are very fast, you could do even more, yes, but you need to scale through others many times, right? And scaling through others requires trusting your team and coordinating, leading, and dashing, like saying, you do this, you do that, more so than doing yourself. And then you'll also become, let's say, the go-to person at unblocking. So you're more of an unblocking people than doing it yourself. And this is, I would say, the hardest thing you can ask ICs, especially very good ICs. So very good ICs like to do things on their own. They're very good. That's how they got there. This point is very, very hard on them. The third one is going to be translating things. So I put requirements as an example. But when you become more senior in your role, you're going to be talking, with CTOs, VPs of product, VPs of engineering, even customers sometimes, right? Imagine they want a specific feature from your product. If I'm setting the product vision, I need to understand it. PMs help you there, but sometimes PMs are not technical enough to understand why some feature cannot do something, right? They just know the feature is not there. So sometimes you have to speak with customers, VPs of customers. I speak with a lot of customers here in Portugal. Your job is to take what they tell you, and they're going to be ambiguous, right? They're not going to say, no, I want this specific feature that does whatever in whatever seconds. They're not going to say that, unfortunately. That's why LLMs cannot help you there. But you need to take whatever they tell you and distill it to the different teams you have to speak to after, right? If it's engineering, then you will need to speak engineering terms, right? We are technical. If it's product, you need to speak to them, in like money terms, really. Like, how is this going to help our product? This is, I would say, easier than the previous one. But again, is a complete mindset shift from what got you to a senior engineer, right? When you are a senior engineer, you're usually more in the weeds of it rather than seeing at the whole forest. And the fourth point I think people should focus on when they want to become senior and above, or staff plus, as they say, is looking ahead. More than developing the feature for today, for the product today. For example, in Amazon, someone tells me, the backups can only go to 128 gigabit. That's a fact. That's an hard quota. Let's look into make that quota bigger, okay? But how much bigger? Should we make it, 256? Maybe it covers all the customers. Or maybe in 5 years' time, we will need to revisit this decision again because I didn't look far enough ahead. And this kind of connects to the first point, which is staying up to date, okay? Both together, you will be the person that the company trusts and the product people trust to make the correct decision. And most likely, your decisions are going to be technical decisions, the one I just mentioned, like of a backup side. But you need to look ahead. You cannot make short-sighted decisions as you would as an associate engineer, right? When you are working problems at the task level, or even a project here in IST, right? You can just make a hack as long as it works and passes the automated test they send you. Yes, let's go with it, right? That's why GPT works so well. But realistically, that code, can I ship that code into production, right? Will we be able to maintain that code? Can I do that code in 5 lines rather than the 500 ChatGPT just spat out of some Stack Overflow, right? As a principal engineer, even Staff Plus, realistically, that's what you need to be, looking towards. Now, what are the bigger pitfalls I see? And again, these are very important because this is where most people stop. I know people with 20 years of experience, even more, and I'm talking, let's say, at Microsoft, so big companies that never become staff plus. They're senior engineers forever. So this is a very common pattern, and there's nothing to be like ashamed about. Some people don't even want to progress further because it's such a different role, realistically. The first one I think I see the most is not being a force multiplier. I touched upon this, but realistically, as a principal engineer, no matter how good you are, you shouldn't be alone, right? You need to help teams. You need to coordinate with maybe even different parts of the product. Let's say we are doing, for those that know AWS, right? Let's say we are working on compute, which is called EC2, but compute is everything, right? So all the other products of AWS use our compute, right? So you need to coordinate with other teams. And that, likewise, if you're working on, I don't know, data analytics from AWS, you'll have dependency on compute, you'll have dependency on storage, and these are internal teams. So as a principal engineer, more so than trying to firefight, which is a very common thing that we do, or just solving stuff yourself, trying to hack your way through, you should be helping others, right? And oftentimes people mistake this as mentoring, so they just do mentoring once a month or twice a month, and we're all good, I'm a principal engineer. It's not only that, right? Yes, mentoring is very important, but you can be a force multiplier in many other ways, right? For example, writing engineering blogs that actually spread to many other companies, right? I can give you a stat that one of my blogs last year was read 90,000 times in a year. So realistic, then we don't have the stats of who uses them, right? But at least 500 customers would be using it according to our internal statistics, right? So that's a way of multiplying yourself through an artifact. And the second biggest common pitfall I see is outdated skills. I mentioned this. People, as they become more senior, they usually like to focus on what they already know. Maybe you know a lot of Python, so I'll just do Python forever. I don't agree with that. But I do see many people that become senior forever that are just working on some outdated technology. Don't get me wrong, some of them get paid very well, because as these technologies phase out, I'll give you an example. For example, frame relay is like a networking technology, or like COBOL from banks, you know. So if you know COBOL, probably you're going to get paid very well until it finishes, right? So it's kind of nuanced. Nonetheless, if you want to progress, I think you need to stay up to date. So going down a level, going from generics to actually what has worked for me, and might not work for you, but did work for me was for sure continuous learning. I've been working in different technologies since I joined. So initially I joined Cisco, now I'm in AWS, but I've worked across networking stack, now more cloud. I always like to learn. I read roughly 50 books a year. I try to make one per week, but I don't always make it. But I also do courses. I think continuous learning is for sure my number one reason of success. My second one was proactively reaching out. I'm an introvert, but I did reach out through my career to different teams, different people. So I asked if I have a problem. I said like, maybe you've done this in the past, maybe not, or just about career in general. Should I move to this team? Should I move to that one? I identify a couple of people that I think could help me with that decision, and I do reach out. Sometimes they say, no, it's okay. But if you reach out to 10 and one of them talks to you, and that one actually gives you good advice, it's worth it, right? That has been a very good force multiplier in my career. And the third one, and I see this is not scale, is a little bit to the side now, is scaling myself through artifacts. And in this case, artifacts here, I did books, I did blogs, and I did white papers. Artifacts in AWS mean other things. It could be videos. I presented reInvent, for example. But for me, what has worked really well in my career was I learned something, I apply it, let's say, to a project, but then rather than just forget about it, I usually try to document it in a more generic manner that people can apply to other things, right? And then I just make it available online, right? LinkedIn or any other mechanisms. What did not work for me, which also plenty of things. First is industry specialization. Many people become senior in their companies by focusing on a specific thing. This could be financial services industry. This could be, you know, a specific technology. So it's very common, by the way, very, very common. Many principal engineers are principal engineers of something rather specific. For me, it just was not my thing. I prefer more generic things. Like I said, I've done networking, compute, but it's a common one. The second one is mechanisms. We use this funny word, but basically this means like programs. Rather than doing like a blog or something like that, maybe you can create an initiative in your company. I don't know, Portuguese in tech within AWS. I don't know, something like that. So create like a group, focus group, something like that. I never really did it, but most of my colleagues and most of the colleagues from other teams as well, from other companies, do it, and it's a very known thing for staff plus engineers to do. So focus a little bit of your time in scaling your knowledge, creating communities, all of that. And this, again, is probably more controversial than the lead coach, scheduled mentorships, right? Most people that you speak to recommend that you have a mentor, at least one. Usually they recommend even more than one. And you have this recurring mentorship with this person. Usually it's a more senior person than you, doesn't need to be, but usually that's the way it goes. I never did it. My mentors are more things that I look in my direct approaches ad hoc. Of course, I speak with people more senior than me, others less senior than me. They call it reverse mentorship. But I never did it like in a, I don't know, structured manner, for lack of a better word. I do it more as I need or as they need. And this is controversial again, because if you go online or if you ask probably anybody else, they will tell you this is a very good force multiplier, right? Just having someone that you speak to on a regular basis, you can share your career ideas. Now, I'll show you this picture, which is how did it work out for me, right? To become a principal engineer, usually you take around 20 years, give or take, maybe less, it depends. So I started as an associate in Cisco in Poland. So I left IST, I went to Poland. That was like 2017 in March. And then I put some CCIs in the middle. For those that don't know, CCIs are some Cisco certifications. I became a mid-level engineer roughly a year after, then a senior engineer a year after that. At that point, I was hell-bent on being a principal before 30, so I stopped making it like a thing that will maybe happen if I do well, to interviewing quote-unquote people, principal engineers, about what they did, what were they doing, how did they get there, how long did it take. So I kind of made a structured mechanism about it. I distilled some knowledge. For example, most of them had patents. Most of them were publishing books. At the time in Cisco, most of them had RFCs, so like the way you create protocols. So I tried to identify out of those things what I could do. That was by the time I was a senior, so that's 2019 probably. And all of them spoke in events, so I put the milestone there. I think I presented 500 people the first time there. I presented in O'Reilly. After that, I became a staff engineer, and I started to report directly to the CTO of Cisco, and we were doing mostly innovation back then. But staff was still not enough, so I kind of wrote books in the hopes of maybe a book will get me there. The first one didn't get me there, newsflash. I changed to AWS. I was upset, as you see there. I was like, no, I am done with you guys. You don't make me a principal, I'm done. So I went to AWS. I was going to Microsoft, but then I went to AWS because I thought Microsoft would not make me a principal engineer. I arrived to AWS. It was not going that well. They were not making me a principal engineer. So I wrote another book, and that was it. Apparently, the threshold is 2. When you have 2, they're like, yes. No, I'm not sure if it works like that, but they did make me a principal engineer in end of 2023, so not last year, the year before. And from there on, I did wrote the third book. It's not because I want to be a principal anymore. I think by now I just like books. I will not tell you anything about how to become a distinguished engineer, mostly because I don't know. I have the data, so I still have the data. I know what distinguished people, engineers do. At AWS, basically, they just create new products. I could summarize it. But I'm still on my way. So what I meant by to show you this, again, was not to tell you about my life, was more that these tips work. So we went from roughly 20, 18 years to become a principal engineer to, I don't know, 6, 7. So these work, right? Trust me. Actually, trust the people that told me they're in such. I want to finish this before I go into questions with some key takeaways, right? So if you didn't listen to anything I said up until now, it's okay. Just take these ones, right? The first thing is that, yes, this works. I just showed you. Actually, I could give you another example of a person that is on the path to principal that is following pretty much the same. However, they might not work for you, right? We are different people. We have different skill sets. There are common patterns. Take advantage of those. I think most of these apply to a big majority of the people, especially in big companies. I don't know about small companies. It's not my experience. I only know like the FANG companies. But yes, take it with a grain of salt. The second thing, this is not controversial, but if you talk with product, it is. I don't believe it's possible to progress in engineering without technical or hard skills. Some people tell me it's possible. I've seen people that have done it. I think you need to be extremely well versed in language and writing and all of that to be able to progress in engineering without knowing actual code and stuff. I would recommend you to actually know how to code and stuff, but I mean, some people do it. Don't fall to like this. Nowadays, everyone, if you go to LinkedIn or anywhere, really, there's like million paid courses how to get into Fang. Pay me $50 and I'll get you into Fang. Yay! Don't fall for that. I mean, there's a lot of free resources in the internet out there, both to learn technology and to get into Fang. How does the interview work? The leadership principles, all of that. So don't pay for that, please. And the last two are more personal, right? Which is, don't find excuses, right? Maybe you didn't know yes, inverting binary tree sucks, yes. But if you need to do it, just do it, right? You need to learn it. It's the only way. Be proactive, learn more than what they teach you in school. Again, I also went to Technic. What they teach is very helpful, right? Especially how to think. We have a bunch of stuff. At the time, I think compiladors was like terrible. In retrospective, I liked it. But yes, at the time, things might not look as they are. And then I have high standards. I think this one is a very Amazonian one, really. In Amazon, we have these leadership principles. One of them is high standards. And what I mean by this is that don't do wacky things, right? Like if you're doing a project, do it well. Don't just, put some code there that maybe works, but there's no unit test and just ship it. I think that's not the way, and that's actually not the way I've seen people progress. People that do well, and I've seen do well, usually have very high standards. So that's what I would recommend you do as well. More than talk at you, because this is what I've been talking like for the past 15 minutes or more, I actually want to open it up for questions. I don't think there is a mic. So if you have any specific questions about Amazon or otherwise, career stuff, there is a mic, there you go. Just shoot. You can shout.
Hi.
Hello.
Thanks for the talk. In the associate step, you mentioned about like projects, and I recently met someone who told me that when you're building things, right, building portfolio,
yeah.
right. So I recently met someone who told me that it might be better for you to do like open source, because open source reflects what people will actually do in real world, because there are tickets and all those things. But they are very hard to do, like some of the projects, finding the right projects and everything. So what do you think, when people are employing, do they look at your projects more, or do they look at the open source more?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you can do open source, do it. I think, as you mentioned, I completely agree with mention, it obviously applies to the real world. But oftentimes it's hard, and sometimes I would even say, depending on what contributing, it might not be what you're being hired for afterwards. So yes, it is real world. It might not be your real world. I think most of the times, I can tell you what I look for. I look more for to projects, even if you don't apply. Let's say you're applying for AWS, and you've built a bunch of AWS architectures. To me, that shows, one, that you have high standards, you're going out, you're learning more, not necessarily related to your school work. And like I said, when you are an associate, when you're getting into that role, I don't expect you to know level 400 Python. I mean, maybe you do, amazing. But if you are not at that level, it's okay, right? They're not going to hire you as a principal engineer, right? So they're going to hire as an associate. I would probably go more towards your own projects, but also not an hello world, like something more, I don't know, a little bit complex, with some meat on it. But open source, yeah, I would shy away from it unless you're, for example, contributing to the documentation, which is a great way to have your open source stamp. Yeah.
And did the money motivate you to like climb up the ranks, or was it just?
Come on.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, for me, I think, like I said, up until I was a senior engineer, I was just, doing my thing. I like to learn, so I was just doing okay. I think by the point I reached senior up and above, I was like, no, this is like a quest now. So I was on my quest to principal, yes.
Thank you very much.
Of course.
So you said that the main way that one advances to, is it distinguished engineering?
Yeah.
Is to build new products. Can't that cause some problems where suddenly you have a bunch of people who are trying to just develop new products, essentially out of, I want to get there?
Yeah. So I said that specifically for AWS, so let me put it into a show. This happens a lot in FANG, I think more than in small companies, which is, if you motivate people to be promoted in a certain way, like this is the mechanism, right? Like you need this, this, and that. Let's say you need a patent, a presentation to 1,000 people, and a product, right? People will gamify. This is life, right? They will start doing it. Yes, we had that problem, so people were trying to gamify it. When I said build new product, I mean, to put in perspective, AWS, I think, has 10 distinguished engineers worldwide. So they're very few, and they've built projects. It's more so than having a metric. For Cisco, I think you needed to be responsible for $1 billion of revenue, recurring. So you need to capture that somehow with your relationships. Yes, people try to gamify it. Yes, people try to build products just to build products.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. You have Google, for example, where you've had like 5 chat apps at this point, none of which are relevant, I think. You've had Google Plus, Hangouts, Meet, Duo.
But if you reach that point, you already won, right? Because you know those products. Way before that, I'll tell you examples in Amazon. Let's say before a product actually comes to light, there's internal, like maybe it's only for internal people, then it's like, so if it became that, probably you'd already become, you were very near or become a distinguished engineer because you actually did build the product.
Well, yeah.
Yes.
Well, yeah, I'm just saying for the company as a whole, having
Yes.
5 chat apps isn't ideal.
Yes, you're right.
Hey there, great talk. I just want to know what the approach your experience to the approach to innovation with external companies and startups, and maybe there's an alternative path for some of these students to reach a level inside AWS through an alternative path. So historically, with some of the projects, startups we worked with Visa and Shell, we worked with their innovation teams and we tapped into their innovation budgets. And then from working in the innovation budgets into the operational budgets was kind of a challenge for us. But I knew when we got to that level, to commercializing some of the products, that a lot of our senior team later on ended up moving into some senior roles at those companies. So from your experience, have you had any direct exposure working with startups and maybe some technical people that took an alternative path and made it to a senior level?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, this is the one I presented today as my experience, right? So it's what I did working from inside the company. I do know people that were acquired in both of my, so in Cisco I know Dynatrace, for example, was acquired, and AppDynamics and Thousand Eyes, all those folks, and they did similar to what you said, which is, you know, let's say they grow within their Thousand Eyes as an example, right? And then after they were Thousand Eyes, they were acquired by Cisco, and they gave him either equivalent titles or even above. So there is an alternative path, which is kind of building a product or building a company. I cannot speak extensively to it because it's not my experience, but yes, I do know people both in AWS that came from Elemental and in Cisco from Thousand Eyes, etc., that were acquired, yes.
And just a quick follow-up. So is there an innovation team within WS that works with external startups with a budget, an allocated budget?
Yes. So yeah, both of these, I mean, I can speak for the ones I know, Cisco and AWS. Yeah, those have dedicated teams and dedicated budgets. They do all the due diligence, all of that, to acquire companies when there is a need. However, AWS has a much bigger focus on building internally and Cisco on acquiring. But AWS also has it. It's possible. It's not common. Okay. Yes.
Well, you talked about motivation and how it comes in waves, and that you kept on being motivated because you set a goal for yourself, which was to become the role that you desired. But how did you deal with it on more of a perspective for mental health? Did you read books about that topic in specific, and how do you keep yourself motivated in a healthy way to be careful not to overwork yourself, for example?
Good one. So today I was having lunch with a professor from IST, actually. He was my thesis professor, and we were talking about that specifically. I think, so first my specific scenario. I wouldn't say I was always motivated. I had a goal, which is different, right? I had a goal. Yes, that goal to some extent motivates you. I was not always motivated. I think it's a mindset thing. In my companies, I can tell you that much, that like work-life balance and all of that, that's not the focus. Internally, it's not the focus. So if you want to progress, let's say you want to get to a role that the expectancy is to take 15 years, right? As an example. If you want to get there in 15 years, it's okay. If you want to get there faster, probably you're going to have to make sacrifices. Either it could be work-life balance or it could be something else. Or maybe you are ahead of the curve. Maybe you're the Ronaldo of Python. That works too. But, but yes, in my case, I didn't, I set a goal. I was not always motivated to answer your question, but I just went for it. I did not read books on the topic. Nowadays, when I became closer to principal, then I started reading different types of books. Initially, I just read tech. I was really tech. That's why it was so hard for me. I was speaking from experience to become more senior. I was just into tech, okay? I had to work a lot. I will not lie to you, more than what is allocated. But I had, like I said, a goal. What I can tell you from other folks nowadays, in the past years, I think this has been more, not only on the news, but I think is more talked about, right? And big tech, this year I think is an exception because they're crazy, but the years previous to this one, people were more on that. I think there was more controls. I can tell in AWS, if you don't take vacation for more than 6 months, you get an email from HR. So there is more concern also from the company piece to not overwork yourself. But if you can, in these companies, they'll take what you can get, right? There is no 9 to 6. There is nothing. There's just deadlines of, let's say, deliverables, right? Most of these companies don't measure you on, you show up at 9 with your card and you leave at 6. Nobody cares. They're going to say X tickets, right? And if you do more tickets, congratulations to you. Does it answer your question?
I think it answers the question about how you would plan to not overwork yourself, but how would you incorporate your mental health in general, not just related with work? So, for example, if something bad happens in your life, do you see people around you neglecting those things that could be taking a toll on them because they think they need to keep up the consistency that you talked about before?
For sure. I think it's a very deep question. Yeah, for sure. So I was very lucky that within that period of my life, I could focus on work, right? Mostly. I worked a lot of hours and I was happy with it. I've seen people that were on a good trajectory get sidetracked because of non-work reasons, okay? But yes, I do think, but I think, so Amazon is international, there's other companies, Cisco as well. I think in Europe, there is more sensitivity to that. Let's say you have a problem, people are more okay with you taking some time off, etc. If you're focused in the US, that is different, and I do see people, maybe neglecting some other aspects of life, personal or otherwise, to keep up the quote-unquote grind, yes.
Thank you, that clarified it.
Okay, we have time for one more question in this stage, so...
Hello.
Hello.
You talked about building a portfolio. So what were the main experiences and projects in your portfolio that helped you enter in Cisco?
Wow. Really? Don't ask me that. So, okay, how do I answer this? This is recorded, right? So, cool. I didn't do it. So I will tell you, I didn't do it. That's why I can speak from what I should have done in that piece. So I did the associate piece, I didn't do it. So when I interviewed for Cisco, I was doing my master's in IST, and I didn't, like I said, I didn't know that much networking other than fundamentals. I made the mistake of not knowing what Cisco did, so I was not prepared whatsoever. However, wait, it's not as bad as it looks. However, like I said, I was very good in tech. So for me, I was hired by luck. They told me this after the fact, so they selected someone that didn't accept, and they selected me. So I was just lucky, realistically. But yeah, I was, like they said, this is their words, I was extraordinarily ahead of any candidate in terms of technical ability. So I was techie, okay? Yes, I didn't have a portfolio, I'll be honest with you, other than my master's, but you should. And I've learned this a lot from my colleagues in the US, where for them, in not only US, UK, I think as well, but in the US, it's 100% clear. They focus a lot on extracurriculars, building stuff. And when you see one of those CVs, when I see one of those CVs versus, let's say, what would be my CV in this case, yeah, you have very little chances of beating that just through tech, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Of course.
Okay, thank you everyone. So before we end our session, we will do a giveaway, the session's giveaway. We will be giving away an Amazon Echo Pop. Echo Pop?
Don't
Yes.
ask me. Yes.
An Amazon Echo Pop.
There you go.
So I will be asking my colleagues to do the giveaway, please. it will appear here, the winner, and then Ivo will award you with the with the award. So let's pick the winner of the first giveaway of the first keynote at SINFO, and the winner is André Rodrigues. So I will call you to the stage, please, to get your award, André Rodrigues. Is he here? Are you here? Okay, round of applause to André. Let's go. So congratulations, André. You are the proud winner of an Echo Pop.
Parabéns, congratulations.
Give it up for André and Yves Pinto.